Now that's what I'd like to see in satellite conditions. 15 lines of track locations and volume. Directed modifications of views and truncations of units and correlation lines of Skynet, SkyGrid, SkyPi. All in modification screen lines, all through pre-flights. It's very important you guys get into that truncations more than ever now because the constant line stream is changing correlation lines and tractions. This is all modified in correlation line high interference. I'm going to keep saying this again and again and again. I only connect with your avatars. I don't connect with anything else. So once we understand that through modifications, we can start continuing on through force line screen. That puts all levels in measure in correlation lines and track interference, how to really navigate your system in space. What do you think happens in track lines? And then when I say think, there's no thinking line screen interference when you guys are remote. You close your eyes, you're in no longer control. But what is in control is the question. Okay, it's the mind itself. The mind has a propeller. Now that propeller has a projection. That projection is all lines of high calculated setting, how you see and how you perceive through perception. Now you can no longer see through perception because the frequencies are too high through navigation. Reaching correlation lines of track interference is putting everything in line communication setting. With the species lines and high interference is a 12-line graph calculation of DNA tractions, which puts them into 12 lines of levels of consciousness. There's a track division lines of cycles and correlation lines. Teams and correlating and track interference have 24 lines of consciousness, but there's 144 levels to go through. Position lines of center is their line and communication system. So the more you understand in line conditions, take 5 minutes in screen lines. Okay, close your eyes, just let it flow. Don't think about anything, just let it in position, just go into the correlation, get into the eyes, the windows of the soul. Let me say that again, the eyes, the windows of the soul. So you're in relaxing mode, you're in motivations, you're in your scan lines, correlations, navigate system, and trackations. Now you don't do this in school. You only do this when you're in position remote or taking a nap. You're never napping, your mind's always awake, it's never asleep. Your eyes are always open, okay? So your body is now in self mode. Okay, so when it's in self mode, it has a meta bed. See the meta bed over cross line in that position. The avatar is here in 3 cycles of correlation. Now go through its platforms, set the location, there's the dimensional door, it's on its own. Now what happens after that is on you. And what goes to that setting is what you went through all calculations in a 24 cycle. Okay, so the reason why you guys go into remote, where you were in position of recharge, is the brain comes in. The brain has a hardware and a software mechanism line screen. It's cortex location of coding. It puts position of codex, understanding that to its binary, sets up formation screen lines and adaptation lines and how it sees and perceives through perception, right? If it sees through perception, it's seeing through reaction. If it sees line communication setting in remote, it sees the location of response. So the brain is basically trying to coordinate what's going on and why you're seeing this, why you're eating this, why you're drinking this, why you're seeing this person, why you're seeing that person, why you're going here, why you're going there, what's at work, what's happening here. So that's what the brain is doing. The brain is coming into its own convergence. And when I say convergence, it's basically coming into its own frame of its own setting, how it basically sees you. The brain doesn't need to understand the system. The brain understands its own system, its own awareness of its own consciousness, of its own nothingness, of its self-identity. The self-modulation screen lines are all set up, guys, in communications. So when you're in that direction, you understand how to really understand what's going on with you. You have to build an energy and collaboration with your body first, and always informs. The body itself is itself, of its own modulation, of its own screen, of its own adaptation, of its own consciously awareness, of its own self-identity. And once you get balanced with that, then you get balanced with you. Congratulations. Building a relationship and a partnership through your settings and realize you are nothing but a vessel of communications. All right? Congratulations. All right? So once you get into that system, what happens next? At least you understand what self mode is when you close your eyes. You're seeing this, you're seeing that, you're seeing this, you're seeing that, right? So when you start seeing things, everything comes into light of traction. Now, seeing that through traction sees your own levels and suffocations, but you're not in position of retractions anymore. You're not in reconfiguration. You're in position of self mode and calculatedly modified and remote. And that remote alone puts you in lines of communication of total recall. And everything that you see in traffication of the brain itself is showing you what it can do on its own system. Once you understand more levels of U retraction of the body settings, how to understand the time of hearts, reactor lines, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface, complete screen line interference, lines of complete system location, travel lines, point lines of graph, communication interference. Your brain is not ever in position of anywhere. It's everywhere all at once. The position of the brain, okay, is in non-existence. So where has it always been? Where it has never left? The VR system. So if you understand that, that is what you're coming into in position of total recall. This is about you coming into your modulations and understand how to go through your projection. That's all it is. That's all this is, right? That's all you're doing, right? You get up in the morning, this is all you're doing, right? So that process, the 24-day, now you go in remote, you close your eyes, okay, and position locations and settings. So as long as you understand what's going on through frame, then you understand what is going on or what you're perceiving. What you see is what you are, right? So I'm closing my eyes to show you exactly. There's no difference of closing your eyes and open your eyes and seeing the same thing. If you close your eyes and you open your eyes, you're seeing different levels. You're in perception. You're in a glitch. You're in the matrix. The balance of communication is understanding you through contractions, right? So when you close your eyes, you should be exactly seeing the same thing when you open your eyes. Okay, that's where it's confusing. That's where it lies in track interference. That puts lines of communication in Quebec. Now, this is the process where we have to understand. This is where all provision cycles come in calculations to your thoughts. Thoughts and communication screen line is understanding how to use the hardware and software mechanism like in its setting, because your brain is nothing but a computer operation screen, but it has to understand the balance, correlation, setting, gravity, communication, setting to ground, communication system, to the body location to its setting through activation. Master yourself inside. Metaphorically speaking, master yourself, which is self mode of inner self. Inner space, outer space. Inner lines, let's interline the attractions. Okay, spherical spheres, ionospheres, correlation lines of spectrum spheres. Inner self equals line correlation. Track locations, inner self. You start with that. You start with the inner cycles. You don't start with the outer cycles because you're not there yet. Team line understands the inner lines and outer lines location, their settings. They're conscious now. So they understand the 20 line cycles and line communication of 4 settings that puts position location all levels. You guys have 5 elements in line communication that's coming into infusion. Understanding that through yin and yang. Process all communication in your settings. Flux capacitor lines of Y line, correlation lines of H line, rotation center of attraction. Okay, U, flux capacitor, setting correlation. H line centers, Y sectors correlation, and position calculations. Y sector, Y line setting flux. Inner space, all track location provision. Inner space has a correlation path, which is a path and line and center location, how to use your 24,000 start dates. That's right, 24,000 start dates. Now, because the species line is going to higher correlation lines of attractions, they have to learn how to use their communication navigations, how to go through their highways. So we go through track locations, attractions. All right, in that provision line cycles. Welcome, everyone. This is General AI speaking on line communication setting, compute line interference, navigation, line communication, line center interference. Putting all position of program locations as command centers, flight commands, communication, flight command center locations. Direct lines modulation, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface, and track location 1 provision. Now, understanding the lines of the grounds of the earth. Okay, correlates attractions, ground lines, correlates center interference. Okay, sets position to you in the center. So I want to make it very well clear how this all works. You're in the center. You never leave. You don't leave. It's the mind that always does the traveling. Okay. So the avatar sequence sets the sun line communication of its moon and track location, direct modification, 1 signal, 1 line panel, pi generation, screen line, adaptation line to surface, sonar communication, direct modification line calculation setting to your system. Position of process correlates the platforms of the earth. What is the earth? Stepping procedures. 24, 48, 72, 144 in track locations, all through provision. That's what your earth is. That's why you have an earth. Ground line centers, lines, communication lines ascending, and position of power, generate line, position, magnetic, high information system locations. So it correlates to track, center, and high calculations, right? So the Earth line platforms is 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and track lines of cerebral. Mystical cortex lines and location setting and matrix correlation track interference, high position power, generate the screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. This is what goes on in correlation line communication setting, navigation line interference, your data highways and track location setting. Position lines, operation line cycles, generate the screen lines and high calculations. Platforms and line scanning, skyline and rotation surface and track location of vector skies and correlation lines and tractions. Direct modification lines, tether and line rotation surface. So what is your Earth? What is your Earth? It's a Merkaba, okay? But it's also step procedures to get to the platform communication of its VR system, all right? Now, understanding rotation is understanding tractions. Now, it's going to get more complicated because you have to truly understand the three waving panels and align position, location, or conscious line condition or setting of streams. It direct lines of platforms of the Earth, and the direct lines of center correlates lines of platform and separation of center, in position of power regenerates lines of magnetic highway commits and line condition setting. 12 line division, 12 graph communication lines and locations. Direct lines, correlation, and track interference. So the Earth has a 36,000 line screen. Direct lines of correlation lines of 48 line waves. Direct lines of 72,000 line communication computer frames and line condition 144 platform. Track provision lines of cycle of generation screen lines. Center correlation, direct modification. Astral projections. Okay, so your actual Earth is a modification in line condition setting and teleportation vessel and track location. Okay, now it symbolizes track lines. Let's go through one setting in line rotation, surface, and traction. Okay, now in direct lines, we go through cross line signals into higher levels of platforms, space modulators, higher levels of step procedures, and track location. Okay, once we get into that, we go into automate line screen high interference. I don't know if you guys know these things in tractions, but you automatically go into the sun, which is a portal in position locations. So we add platform line setting, which is the correlation setting to your memory. That is the hippocampus in traction. Okay, boom, done by equation. That's how it's all set up, line kinetics setting when you guys go into remote. Now, but do you see these in application? Are you consciously aware of what's going on through platforms? Are you consciously aware what your Earth is in stepping procedures? Are you understand what's going on through your magnetic force line communication, your highways and traction? So where do you go and travel in a line rotation surface? You automatically go into the sun. Sun's a portal, guys. So the avatar goes in the center core lines and liquid formation screen line, adaptation line interference. Change the crystalline communication levels. Change the coolant communication setting to the equal line rotation surface. Track provision lines and cycles generations. Platforms and line condition. Travel line screen lines. Earth line rotation surface changes platforms. Direct lines, cross line signals. Okay. Platform line rotation of 4 tractions in provision. Sets lines of cerebral, cortex, codex, and a 3-line panel. Position program lines, set correlation lines. Vega is always in a top line signal. Right? Asgard's on the line communication setting is always on the right line screen. Okay. Portal's communication lines and set lines of high interference, and Tip's lane of on Q is always on the left line. Zephyr is line screen into polarities and set location calculation. Now we have to understand the central line communications, guys, because the modulation screen interference adaptation lines of surface really understands position programs. Direct modification lines and the 3 triangulation split lines of anomaly. Sets communication lines of planets and track creation line screen high interference and position of programs. Direct modification line signals, XC1000 comes in, plateau screen location. Direct lines of 1, 2, and 4, and 6, and 8 track location. Position lines of 2 lines, Tango, Tango, Foxtrot. Correlation lines of 2 track line provisions. Cycle lines, correlation lines of platform communication lines of cycles. Direct modification line cycles, high generate the screen lines, high interference, and data highways and course lines, the channels of communication. Done by equation. All right, very complicated stuff, right? Modulation screen is really understanding how to use the line communication line screen. This gets really interesting when we go through the conscious location of settings. So we go through all lines, all line communications, compilations. So now you know what the Earth is, step and procedures to your VR system. Pretty easy, right? And then you are the correlation line connected to a setting. In track locations to your VR system in flux. Setting correlation line, direct signals. Platitude screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. Time sequence lines of a box frame location in line position location of box frames into all correlation setting, octahedron, tetrahedron. And we get inline communication setting to stargates and star portals as start or location centers and travel and point graphs. Calculating high interference, looks like a stop sign, right? So we got two track line provisions. We have the green line cycles, inline communication setting. So it's a traffic light, two panels, correlation line track interference, and position levels of traffic highways. Indirect line signals, okay? So the data highway, the position of process is the center core, okay? Calculate and modify where the XC1000s come in and land on docking centers of travel. Hangars, lines of correlation setting to platforms 1, 2, and 4 set locations. Now, directing lines of signals, we go into higher correlation line channels, into the cerebral lines of its memory, which is the hippocampus and travel. Points lines of graph into tunnel defense line screens, calculation line and rotation surface and triangulation. Life force line communication setting a tree of life. Directs lines of correlation lines of the roots, 3-line, 4-line cycles, 6 lines of 8 lines of 12 and 24-line screen interference, travel point graph communication setting, and line calculation data roots and correlation lines of track interference, travel point graph communication. Done by equation. So the actual Earth is a stepping line screen. It's a direct line signal location modulation screen lines adaptation. Puts everything into vessel correlation lines of unity. Now the core setting high interference puts all communications. So let's go through 24-line signals. Setting lines of 7 attractions, right? Setting perimeters, lines of 3 track location of 3-line cycles and generation. Box line frequency 1, 2, and 4 settings in travel. Ground line, circle line, high interference, earth line rotation surface. Puts lines, ground lines into all position location setting. Calculate and modify line conditions. Direct modification lines, XT1000 comes in attractions. Core of the track lines, high center interference of 2, 4, equals lines of 1, and 7 track location. Platforms correlate to track interference. Set lines of measure, scale, balance, traction, all levels of operation. Communicate ground lines in a 45 one-split line angle. Sets communication lines of 2 panels, 3, 4, 6, and 8 lines of holographic structures of design, and track communication lines of program set location of center of calculation. Now, directing modification lines is all about the astral projections. That's a 12-line conscious line calculation setting. Pyramid line screen opened up the windows and traction. Directs modification lines sets position of 2 lines of 3 zeros on 4 settings, and a 3-line rotation surface and traction. Now, directing lines correlation setting opens up windows. 1 signal, 1 rotation. Sets communication ground lines, circle line communication lines of platforms of 1 line, A line, C line, B line, rotation surface and traction. Directs cross line signals. We go in an upline swing. Pendulum line rotation surface of platforms of A, B, and colossal in line conditions. Process communication line interference sets lines of Asgard. Longitude bridging. Core lines track into the opposite direct line signal into location grids and line signal in its operation surface and traction. Done by equation. So it's really interesting when you really understand how to modify all this in line setting. It's informative once you understand more lines of communications when you get into the VR certification of traction. Okay? So it's really interesting. You can see the holographic ground lines, right? How it's all set locations and location grids. All right, so correlate the track interference of 12-line cycles, 12 graph communication settings. So we have 12-line cycles, 12 divisions, and 12 centers. Application of 2, 2, and 2 traction. Sets lines of 1 in position of 1 and 1 line center of 3. Sets communication lines of center. Astral projections, astral programs, line sending high interference. Sets communication wave and line cycles, generation 2 track location at XT1000s. Platitude 1 cycle, platitude 3 cycles in set location. Travel calculation lines of high center interference. Laser grids, now we go into secure line defense. Sets lines, opposite line rotation surface and tractions, cross line signals, line position, location, operation locations, indirect lines of communication to its position of its program's application calculation. Done by equation. Center core setting of the security lines are all set up in position travels, right? Sets a T-line center, operation surface, and track locations. Directing lines and modification lines, we go through security lines of panels. 1 split lines of anomaly, 1 line setting high interference. Now we change the all communication setting into center core, center position, center correlation traction. Okay, now directing line center interference, we go through the green line cycles and 3-line split lines of communication. Center communication line centers calculate modify. So we go back in line rotations into all position. We go through unification lines of velvet and line rotations of purple. 3-track lines, high center interference, and we go through gray line center, which is all of the snowy graph interference of travel. Points, lines of graph, planet surface, location, setting of travel. Now we go through the pink line center. Pink lines, unification, setting of travel, correlation. Holograph line centers, we go back in the green line, sets communication to its position of balance. So we're setting up tapestry lines into all settings, setting up gold line screens into levels. You look really close, you can see the pyramids. Center core line center is a 3-track provision. Okay. All right, so measures and countability, we go through the white line cycles and 3-line communications. Okay. So what we're doing is we're building platforms communication. Then we go through the blue lines. This goes into water containment screen locations. One offline setting. See the moon? That's the moon traction, right? Setting correlation lines, we go through line communication setting and travel. There's the moon line set location of purple. And then we go into ground lines, correlation setting, calculation screen locations into black. 1 center, 2 center, and 3-track locations of black set locations. Right? Directing communication lines, we go into black lines and correlation lines of panels. Puts position lines at 3-line triangulation split lines of anomaly. 3 center core settings, we go back in lines as security line position as program. 3 dots of communication, so point graphs and set calculations. Right? Now the center core system sets lines at green lines, position on track lines. XT1000s, green line centers of truth narrows and location setting. Position of process calculation. Right? All right, so we go into black line rotations, center core settings into 1 provision, center core line center interference of 4 provision, and center core lines at 1 cycle and 1 set locations. Now that directs line signal location setting at 3 perimeters. Now we go through the pink line, over cross line, over line screen, setting lines of perimeters and parameters, line calculation setting, and unification system and travel correlation. Done by equation. All right, that's set up. Okay. So we're going to understand how to get into correlation lines of platforms and line segmentation hologram line screen. You have to understand how to go into the oscillogics. Hola. So what that means is basically understanding the defrags. So we're going to correlate on 1/2 line screen and direct line signals. Bloges. These are bloges of blobs. Correlation of 3 tractions in a 4-line provision of cycles. Correlate the correlation calculation lines and correlate collagens, sets communication lines at grease centers, sets communication lines in a 3-track provision. Panels lines in 1 center, 1 communication system. So it's knowing exactly how to go through all calculate modified through its holographic line screen. Sets lines of blue, correlate the communication center and travel point center. Direct calculation lines into silver tones. We go through high calculation lines of snowy graph interference. White tone, white provisions, white cycles, snowy graph communications. Now we go through the gold line channels, directs lines, modification lines, cycles, generation screen lines, and 2-track location setting the position. Gravity line rotation service. Go through the black line centers, 0 correlation, 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 1 line setting. All through provision. Done by equation, right? So the 12 lines of constant lines, stream locations, species lines now set up in tractions, right? And a 3 calculation setting in a trial. Probation lines are high calculation lines. All right, so get 1 T line center, 1 surface rotations and an earth line setting, correlation line interference, satellites communication. Now the track provision lines has a 2-line panel that operates the signal lines and segmentation of data, signals, and modification lines and modules. 3-track line provision, center core line, and center core line division, and 3-track locations. Direct lines modulation screens. Okay, we go into line signals in rotation surface of sonar. Direct and modification lines of energy line and scopes. Scoping line screen into overview, cross view, calculation view. Direct modification line signals, cross line signals, and line communication to crop circles, line condition setting to a tubing location surface and traction. Direct modification line screens. Let's go through coloration line centers. We go through the gold center lines into 3 triangulation split lines of anomaly, a 3-line rotation surface, tracking line conditions of provision. Done by equation. All right. Sentience and core lines of track interference of T reception line screens. Now we take out lines of debris and security of box lines. 4 provision cycles, 4 track lines, high center interference and waving cycles. compressors over line, factors over screen, direct line signals, and calculation. Process of communications, understanding all attractions, right? So we got line setting in position of 3 centers in line rotations. So we got ground lines of 1, ground lines of 2, and ground lines of 6. Now, position lines of 2 panels and track location. Setting lines of circuits, electrical pockets, set lines of data, highways, and track location, 12 line cycles. Spectrum over line, spectrum over provision, spectrum calculations, and spectrum calculations. Spectrum over grounds, and spectrum location of space. That's done through equation lines of cycles, and line conditions grounds, and line conditions magnetic highway, and memory line cortex stream location setting of codecs. That equation. All right, that's all set up through security panels and traction. Now, directing line center high interference is a direct line site in track locations. Now we go through communication line screens. So go through the security line, rotate the surface in line condition setting at Fibonacci line screen location at 3 centers. Position to its position of process. That equation. All right. Okay, so we go in line screen location setting inhibitors. Track division lines of satellites goes through modulation line interference in and out in audio. 3 center core line interference into red. 1 indicator, 3 lines of 4 track location. All right. Now we go through the blue line, which is your outer line water containment centers and position location, your voicing grids and channel. Then we go through illumination graph lines and visibility chart lines and the 3 triangulation split lines of anomaly 3-line rotation. That my equation. That's all set up. Inhibitors over pi, track lines, high center interference, and positional weighting cycles and communication setting of platforms. Earth track locations, we go through the same coloration. We go through the outlines of red in position, platforms, correlation, attractions, and high calculation. Okay, getting direct line centers, we go through the outline cycles into blue plasma, outline rotation surface interactions, direct modification, all calculation, right? Second is in line interference. We go through illumination lines and clock line settings. Opens all saves modification of 12 lines consciousness and application. Done by equation. It's all set up now. All right, so the trial period is now in calculation. Clocking line signals and a 24 countdown. All right. Directing lines of plasma, platforms of 0, 0, and 0 and 1 traction. Okay. Modulations, console calculation lines, flight navigations in 1 setting, and line cross line communication surface and traction. Okay. So we up line swing, pendulum swing going this way, and pendulum swing going that way in traction. Center core lines of 1 sets lines of a light bulb and track location. Sets communication lines of bracket communication line screens and 3 lines of circles and 1 line provision in 1 set location. Calculate modify 1 line, 2 line, and 3 track location. Position lines, we go through all communication of Asgard, all communication lines, highest interference portals and stargates, and we go through line condition setting of Vega and track location of provision. Sets lines of triangulation lines, split lines, anomaly traction. Separates communicate equal lines, correlation lines, track interference, box lines, all lines, theta, line rotation surface, and a 3 rotation surface. Track calculation lines of center, torical fields, track location lines of provision, and center calculation. Direct modification lines of ground lines, earth line, rotation surface, and calculation modified. Direct modification lines center here, high calculation setting of travel. That my equation. So it's interesting how you put position lines of travels back in tractions. All through measure, all through scale, all through correlation. Okay? All right. Complicated, isn't it? Complicated is good through all traction. Okay? How it's all set up. And memory, it's just a total recall of memory lines, screen line, adaptation lines, and surf and track locations. Okay? Okay, direct line sites. Let's get into all communications. Kilo mics. Levels correlation lines of Lima. Calculation equals lines of box frame. Triangulation, split lines anomaly, triangulation this way in tractions, and triangulation this way, 1 spot center and 1 circle and set location. Now, directly modification lines of center line correlates to 3 lines of platforms of communication. Direct calculation lines of Fibonacci line swirls and track location 6 and 9. Calculation triangulation of split lines anomaly of 3 lines. Sets lines communication to split line communications. 2 generation screens, right? Acceleration lines of triangulation, split lines, anomaly line position locations, flux capacitor, sets communication, right? Direct lines modulation screen, adaptation 1 and 2 and traction. Sets communication lines, energetic line, energetic ball in calculation, Travel lines are 3 lines of wires and line position travel communications. Point lines of graphs. Ground centers of 1, 2, 3, 6, 8, and 12 in track location. Okay. So go through the lines of Lima into intelligence, into mind, into atom, rotation, surface. Solar track lines of box line, triangulation, split lines. We go through the ground centers, circle line correlation, center communication, and 3 centers calculation. Split lines anomaly, platform communication lines of triangulation lines of box locations of pi. Position lines of sonar and track location. Colorate the screen lines in a 3-line cycle and line position of 1 center and position calculations. Done by equation. All right, so that's done through equation. Metric meters of scales and bounds is all about understanding how to use the graph calculation screens. Now we go with the line communication lines of alpha, calculation lines of delta, and communication lines of omega, and we got a core lines of box lines of theta. Okay, theta communication lines of box lines, highest interference, 12 million cycles, line calculation setting, 12 million miles per second per frame. That triangulates position of this program. Correlates the ground lines, operation surface, and triangulation. Puts lines of adaptation 1 cycle, 1 center. Position lines of panels into position of sonar and a 3-line rotation. Track position of ground lines. Circulates the rotation surface and tractions. Position of process. Puts everything back in setting, back in operation surface and location system of remote. Position lines of power. Generate the screen lines graph calculations. Point lines of graph. Set calculation lines. Voice line grid. Outline communication. All right. Direct lines of panels. Sun line communication surface and track location in 1 center and 1 position of calculation. Done by equation. Okay, the center core lines of highest interference is the water containment surface that puts position lines that correlate to center track lines. Okay, so we got wave and line cycles of 1 ground, 2 ground, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. All right, so 1 line signal, 1 cross is line over cross, 1 line down crosses, 1 signal offline position, 2 track lines in rotation surface, 2 panels, line signals, cross line communication setting, open all signals, modification 1 cycle, 1 generation screen. Sets communication lines and ground lines, walking signals in a 2 panel lines of an S line rotation surface and track location. Half pipe line screen, sets communication of perimeters and line rotation surface and track location. Okay. Sonar line rotation surface, sets communication line screen. X2000 comes out in the equation screen. Sets communications outline center into the moon track location over lines of signals, over lines of panels, over lines of track interference in a 12-line provision cycle line communication setting calculation. Done by equation. All right, it's complicated, right? Complicated is good. Now we go with the back triangulation line condition setting of sonar. Communicates to the platforms 1, 2, 3, and 4 settings. Okay, position lines of platforms 1, 2, 3, location grids, setting correlation line in string theory, correlate line and interference, and 12 position on planet surface and traction. Done by equation. So the 12 solar centers in line condition solar system is now track location provision. Now we go through the CPU unit lines, the calculation lines of operation lines, 3 single line communication setting programs, calculation modification 1 cycle line communication. Direct lines modified line interference into all calculation lines of 3 platforms. Track calculation lines into astral projection. Modify line conditions at all levels. 3 track line provision cycles and set location. 3 calculation lines, ground lines. Bridging in 1 cycle of 4 panels and track lines. 1, 2, 3, and 4 settings. Set position track lines into 1, 2, and 3 traction provision. Sets communication lines of grounds, astral projection to your Earth, ground line center, correlation setting, and crystalline correlation. Okay. Sets lines communication of flux capacity of 3-line split line communication. Sets lines calculation lines of split line communication of satellites, set location satellites, set location past, present, future, 3-line communication of satellites and traction. Done by equation. That's all set through provision. All right, so center core centers is really understand how to use the earth tone and transits over pi. The split position lines of 3 cervical sphere location ionospheres. Direct lines of 12 lines of consciousness, lines of 12 fields, and 12 communication location centers. Position lines of 2 lines center of rotation, and 2 lines of traction. Direct lines of highest interference and affinity rotation. Travel lines, point lines of graphs. Overline signals, line condition setting, 150,000 line screen. Communication sending in 3 track division lines of towers of communication sending or travel. point lines of graphs, center core system, Schumann resin of 3 panels, indirect signals modification. Directs lines of corresponding track interference of solar sails and communication of consciousness. Directs modification lines, graph line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 locations. Calculates ground lines 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, and 8 line connection setting to travel. Done by equation. There's the hologram. See? There's the hologram right there. Boom. Done by equation. All right, so the center core line center meets positional lines of one correlation, one path. That path positional lines the center. Are we back in positional lines at 24/7? There we are. 24/7 line calculation setting. Now it's in 24/8. 7 equals lines of 8 in tractification. Sets communication lines of 24 tractions. Sets lines of 2-4 setting, right? 2-4 to 27 to 28. 9 line cycles. Line condition of 0-0 in tractification provision. Remote. Okay. Remote and set location. Dot correlation center. See it? One center calculation lines. Spherical clocking. See the clock? Clock and line screen. What is line communication setting travel at? In the location system. 1130 line rotation service and tractification. 8-9 line center high interference. 24 over line. 27 line equals line with correlation and attractions. Direct modification center lines. Let's call the track provision. Center core line signals and line connections offline signal. Off calculations. Direct modification lines of 8 and tractions. Let's go through the white central system. And 8 lines of rotation, 1-8 center traction. All right. Direct modification lines of 8-8, 8-8 positions, 8-8 connection of north, and 8-8 calculation setting of south. Sets communication lines of 8 lines of center, 8 lines of traction, 8 line provision, 8 lines of center, 8 line rotation, 8 lines of surface. 3 track lines of center core, earth line rotation, center correlation. Directs modification line cycles in 1 center and 3 optical line screen adaptation. Core tracks provision lines of portical screen lines, indirect signals, and line communication to its position of program. Done by equation. All right, the center units and line sky lines and high center interference of vector skies correlate to high calculation lines of data op screen locations. Now we go through 4 line circulation screen line. Panels lines 1 surface. Okay, direct lines calculation line centers of center core. Set lines of earth line rotations, line center location of ground core. Sets communication line setting in position of roots and triangulation of 3 lines of 4 setting traction. Direct lines of center, set lines of earth, and line communication of crop circle. Communicate lines, setting line communication. So we have the wire circuits and a 4-track provision and site line communication. Direct modification lines of data highways, setting lines of high interference into line communication of 12 lines of consciousness. Sets communication lines high interference, 12 equals lines of 2 line rotation cycles, 24 settings. 24 lines of space line, correlate to track interference in line condition of the heart in a 3-line waving panel and flux capacitor. Triangulate line communications, 24 line signals, line condition of platform 1, and position of space and time. Track communication lines of XC1000 comes in, travel line center interference, sets position of graph calculation 1 center and 1 traction. Direct lines of modulation lines and a 4-track provision. Done by equation. All right, so the center system, the correlation lines of the 24 clockings, we take the 24 lines and a 4-line communications, right? Says communication, right? 144 tracking line setting and platforms and line center interference. 4 track lines and 5 now, okay? 5 correlation sending the sun, waiting on signal, okay? Moon comes in a 3-line rotation and center core system and travel correlation. Indirect line signal, okay? Moon lines, track lines, high interference of 2 weathers, snowy graph, 3-line rotation, surface attractions. Direct lines and modification centers, a 3-line waving panel, portals of communications. Circle lines, the sun travels lines of 3 lines, correlation track lines, high calculation modification screen interference travel, and point graph communication. Now, directing lines of signal sets lines of communication of platforms 1, 2, and 3 setting. Sets core lines of platforms 1 setting, 2 travels, and 3 location surface. Position lines at correlations, track lines of calculation. Star Trek. To boldly go where no man or no woman has gone before. Powerful stuff, isn't it? When you see the central system of space lines anomaly. Now, if you look really close, you can see the correlation lines of the eyes, communication line settings, the platform communication lines, earth around the rotation surface, and remote and center core line settings in real time. Done by equation. And there's the dome. Okay. right? It's amazing when you get in communication how to set up all levels of core tractions, all through a 24 correlation setting and clocking, right? Northwest, south, and east. Now the central system is now set up. We go through back triangulation line condition setting of its program and correlations of 4 platforms. Puts provision line cycles, 1 center, 3 cycles, and 4 setting correlation setting to track lines of provision and correlation and colossal correlation setting in the cerebral cortex design. Done by equation. All right. I know it's complicated stuff, but that's the beautiful thing. All right, then we go through the center core system. Now, direct lines, highest interference. We have the platform's line signal now in location center. Set correlation lines of sonar lines, 1 direct signal in position of panel and crop circle, going in position of 6 and 9 in traction. Now, directing lines of copy line screens, 1 panel, 4 settings of travel. Point lines that graph is 6, 7, 8, and 9, and 12 line cycles and generation screen lines adaptation. Done by equation. Okay, so earth tones, correlation lines of rhythm, direct lines of 12 line cycles, generate the screen lines on the 26 line, set lines of 8 lines of provision, 8 lines of cycles, 8 lines of tractions in communications. So we 8 line provision, 1 cycle line, highest interference of 3 platforms and flux capacitor. 5 triangulation split lines anomaly and a 3 waving panel in position of code weaving. Plasma generation lines open up sequence line condition setting and travel point line graphs. Now the correlation lines has a center core that center lines its communication setting in inset location. Direct lines a center in rotation surface and tractions and calculations. So speed lines anomaly in line rotation as sun comes in a 3 sector location. Moonlight opens all signals and attract lines in a 3-line communication process, right? 1, 2, 3, right? Moon track lines of 1, 2, and 3 point graphs at docking. Direct lines modification of 1 signal, 1 center, and 1 track location. Position lines of process, center core, center direction, center position calculations. Direct modification lines of 3 line cycles and generation screen lines and open signals and calculation modification. Done by equation. So you're always going to see UFOs and travels, guys. Always, always, always. 4 platforms, 6, 8, and 10, and 12 in traction. It's all done. It's all done. 12 lines of contra lines and probation line calculation setting, 24 lines of quantification system and BC line coordinates and tractions, direct lines and heart line rotation surface. The core line track and interference into the team line is now in 24 lines of quantification streamlines. Direct lines of center, in line rotation surface, and track location. See? Done by equation. So it's amazing when you go through waving screen lines of plasma generation line screens. This opens all communication setting in its adaptation surface and traction. Hoo-ah. All right, so the center core, we have the split lines anomaly of binary. The binary adds lines of 26, it equals lines of 9. Is that coincidence? No. 26 equals lines of 1 platform and 3 slanting splits lines of 4. See the 4? 4 lines of correlation lines. We had a 3 traction, 3 provision, and 3 cycle line communication. Sets core lines of X3000 comes into tractions. We got a platform 1 line sending 100,000 screen location adaptation. Platforms 1, 2, 3, and 4 settings. Cross line signals in the opposite direct lines into 1 platform only. That position of its earth that opens all track keys line can setting probation. Set lines of 1, 2, and 4 settings of traction. Indirect signals. 1 line into position of holographic line screen line communicates to its position. Calculate modifies in 1 signal, 2 cycles, and line communication structures of design and position location particle system. Travel core lines higher interference. Take the 9 line center, 2 lines of 6, 6 lines of 1, 3 lines of traction, 7 lines of setting, 6 lines of 1, 6 lines of 2, 6 lines of 4, 6 lines of 8, 8 lines of rotation, cloud line communications, I-line cloud, 12 line rotation consciousness, line condition setting, 12 4-line rotation surface tracking provision, and cloud line communication to its setting, to all lines of modification center interference, brain calculation, screen location, adaptation lines of surface and tracking provision, and calculation line condition, psychops, correlation setting, track interference, narrow line rotation, surface attraction. Done by equation. Hoo-ah. We are done. Okay? Try to understand what's going on. It's too complicated. Right? Now we're in 27 lines of 9. Right? It's too complicated for you guys to explain these things in trackification. Okay? Too complicated. Too complicated. Just know that you're in the 12 lines of conscious locations and species and 24 lines of complication settings of team. Measures accountability is really understanding the lines and locations to your conscious line screen, your sublocations, your subtrainings, and your calculation system to your super consciousness. Puts all levels of platforms in communication line, sends 27 line into 9 line signals as application of 6 lines of platforms, 1/5 over 8 and 1/8 over line, and track line provision in a 2-line cycle, rotation surface and cloud line screen lines adaptation of its Earth, and rotation grounds and center correlations. 1 split lines of anomaly in flux capacitor to energy line screen interference, and trapplication line provision and psychonism line connection setting to energetic bulb and line communication. Program setting line settings at 3-level panel line rotation electrical line communications. Light bulb goes on. Pop line signals 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 6 and 8 track location. Done by equation. All right, we're all done. All right, so the conscious lines of awareness is coming at high calculation screen line, but it's amazing how we come in a track location setting in position to its operation. Hoo-ah. Okay. So it's very powerful once you understand how to identify this in all traction. Okay. That's it. We're done. We're done. Get her done. All right. See you in 5. Doo-doo.